Hi, my name is Tom Hunter, MSc from Clearwater Canvas in Bel Air, Florida. I'm the designer and creator of EasyFrame program, and I'm going to talk to you today about how you go ahead and find out what your actual radius is that your bender creates. In order to use EasyFrame, you have to have the actual radius being created by your individual bender. There's two things that go into that: the bender radius and the type of bender you have, and the type of material and diameter of your tubing. For each diameter and for each material type, you have to do all of these calculations to get your actual radius. Okay, the bender radius and the actual radius. The actual radius is always going to be larger than what the bender radius, because it's spring back. When you bring it back, it always bends back a little bit, and so your actual radius will be somewhat larger than that, and that depends on each material and diameter also. The first thing we want to do is I'm going to grab a pen here, and after you have your piece of material, and you need something that's in the 3 to 4 foot range, it can be a scrap piece. It doesn't make if it's scratched or whatever, or it got a kink in it, doesn't make any difference as long as it's uniform through here. And the first thing you want to do, I like to do, is on this bender, it's a Bend-Arc bender. I would like to do I like to position by marking the top right along the front edge of this. Then I actually mark the beginning and ending of my bend. In this case, I know the beginning angle, the bend begins right here from previous things. It's an eye thing, but there's another way of doing that, and I'll show you how to do that later on after we get it all bent. The other thing we're going to do is bend the end of the bend, which is going to be down in this location here. After we've made our bend where it transitions between the radius curve and back to straight again, we need to mark that so that we're actually taking measurements inside the radius. After we've gone ahead and made our 90-degree bend, and make that as close as you can to 90 degrees, it's just an eyeball thing, so it's basically down here straight. You're going to have to go ahead and mark the end of your bend, or where it changes over. In this case, we're going to make a bend mark right here on the tube. Now we have a starting bend, which is up here, and an ending bend here. We want to make sure all of our measurements are inside of these two marks in order to make sure we're inside the curved area to take a radius calculation. The one other information I want to give you is how do you determine the beginning of the bend. This is our bent piece of tubing. And you can eyeball it. In my case, I've already marked where that beginning of that bend is on for my bender, but for your bender, you won't have that. You can eyeball it to see where it's starting to make its change, or if you look at the inside radius, let's see in the inside radius of your tubing, here's the start, here's the end. At the inside of your radius, when you look at that, if you bring your finger across it or something like that, you can actually feel where it starts to change with it, because when you're bending tubing, you're actually going to be starting to stretch it and deform it slightly. So there'll be a little bit of a bump, and just prior to the bump is where you're beginning. So if you look in here, you'll feel the bump is like right in here is where the bump is, and just in front of that is where your bend actually starts. And then it narrows down as it compresses this side and it stretches this side. After we've gone ahead and made our bend at the bender, we brought the actual piece of tubing over to our workbench. We're going to make a couple of marks on this. We want to take all of our measurements to the center line of the tubing. The actual center line of the tubing is the very highest point when it's laying on the thing. You can either eyeball that or you can even mark it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and do a marking right along the top center of that tubing. That's the center line that we're going to take all of our measurements to. The next thing we want to do is to make sure that we're well inside of the beginning of the bend and the end of the bend. So roughly I'm going to make another mark about an inch inside, right here and right here. Doesn't have to be exact, but just make sure we're getting inside of that. Then we're going to put another piece of tubing over here to make sure that my ruler lays nice and flat. And inside of that, I'm going to take 4 different readings, center line to center line. So I'm going to line up the beginning of my ruler and the 12-inch on the center lines, which I have right there. So the first reading is our cord length, which is the length across here, and it reads at 12 inches. You go ahead and set it so it does read that. At half of that, or 6 inches, we're going to measure straight up from this point at 6 inches, and I'm going to read that mark. So we got 12 inches, and I'm going to say it's 1 15/16. So we want to go ahead and write down those two measurements. For location 1, it's a chord length of 12 inches and 1 15/16 of an inch. Okay. For the second reading, we're going to do, let's say 11. So we want it on the center line for 0 and at 11 for the other one. And again, now at half of 11, which is 5.5, we're going to go, it's better if you don't touch that, so don't move. But go from 5.5, we want to go up. And we're going to get a reading of 1 9/16. Okay, so write down for location 2, chord length of 11 inches and 1 9/16 for the chord height. Now again, your chord height, just to make sure we know what we're talking about, is at the line created by your ruler going across, which would be the top half of the ruler, and at half of that distance, whatever it is, 11 inches across here in this case, at 5.5, halfway up, you want to go from that point up to the center line of the tubing again and take a reading. So that's the chord height, this is the chord length. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop it down to 10 inches. The reason we take 4 measurements or more, you can do more if you want, is that we are trying to read, even though the 10 inches is probably a pretty good measurement, this reading, being a small number, is inaccurate. So we're going to the 4 of these, and we'll average them together later after we get the actual calculations. So now we have a reading at 10 inches. 0 is at one center line, and 10 is at the other center line. Like that. And then at 5 inches, which is a half of 10, we're going to go up and measure this. And we're going to get, let's call it 1 1/4 inches. So the chord height is 1 1/4, and the chord length is 10 inches. All right, we're going to go ahead and do this one more time. Now you can do it 5 or 6 times if you want. The more you got, the more accurate you're going to be. So let's go ahead and set it at 9 inches now. So we got 0 at one center line and 9 at the other. And at 4.5, we're going to come straight up. And we're going to read, in this case, 1 inch. So the chord height for location 4, the chord length of 4 is 9 inches, and the chord height is 1 inch. Now we've gone ahead and done ours that, and the next thing is to go back to your computer and EasyFrame, and we'll show you how it actually calculates that out.
Now that you have your chord measurements, log into EasyFrame Plus, go to the Admin button, and click on the Radius Calculator. First you're going to click on the Add Radius button, and here you'll enter your first chord length and chord height numbers from your list. So the chord length was 12, the chord height was 1 15/16, which is 1.9375. When you hit the Save button, it gives you a calculated radius of 10.259. You're going to click the Add Radius again and enter your second set of numbers. This was 11 and 1 9/16, which is 1.5625. Click Save, and now you're going to get an average bender radius for those two measurements. Continue with this procedure until all 4 sets of measurements are entered, and you'll get your actual shoulder radius for that bender for the type of tubing that you just bent. In our example, it was a 10-inch bend-arc bender with 1-inch stainless steel tubing, and we had a bender radius average of 10.493. This number will now become your default radius when you enter a new job. If you will be using a different bender or a different kind of tubing for a particular job, you will need to do this calculation again with the new measurements that you take. We suggest you keep a copy of all your measurements and the final radius so that you can easily enter the correct radius when creating a new job. You can always overwrite the default radius when you're starting a new one. And remember, for questions about this or any other feature in EasyFrame Plus, please send an email to support@easyframeplus.com.